Hello everybody, welcome to episode 12 of the midweek molt. Here is your host Robbie from robbiestalkingts.
Hello everybody, welcome to episode 12 of the midweek molt, my weekly podcast where we talk about all things tarantula. Now I had a little break last week, but I did post a video. This was due to recovering from COVID-19 for the second time. I know it's bad. I had it quite bad this time and it's taken me longer to get over it. But in the meantime, I did post content for you guys to watch. But I'm back and I'm here and the midweek molt is back. I know a lot of you were missing it. A lot of you enjoy hearing what I have to say and answering all your questions. But this week is going to be a little bit different. I haven't had any questions this week that, people wanted answering in this episode. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to go through YouTube. I'm going to see what's going on and see if anyone has raised any points of interest that I can, talk about on the podcast. And you know what? One came up. So today we are talking about the importance of water dishes in tarantula enclosures. Now there's a lot of people out there with the idea that tarantulas get most of their moisture that they need from the food that they eat. And even though part of this is true, they do get a lot of moisture from the food they eat, it's also not true. People say that in the wild they don't have water dishes. That's why they don't give the tarantula a water dish. They just let it live off the food that it has. That's just a complete lie. The environments that these animals live in is one big water dish. When it rains, water collects on leaves, it collects in puddles, it soaks up through the substrate, through the ground that tarantulas can drink from. So that is why a water dish is essential, and it helps the tarantula in so many ways. First off, it helps hydrate the tarantula. Hydration in a tarantula is so important. I don't know if you guys know, if you're new to the hobby, but the reason why most deaths happen is dehydration. It can happen very quickly in tarantulas. That is why they need that water source, so that it doesn't happen. Secondly, humidity requirements. Having a water dish inside the enclosure, when that water evaporates off, that creates humidity inside an enclosure, which is important. The book lungs, the way they function, the way a tarantula breathes, they require that humidity in order to pass oxygen through the book lungs to keep the tarantula alive. That is why, even if people say there's no extra humidity requirements, it means you don't have to up it, you don't have to monitor it. It just means that the natural humidity that's already existing in the air is enough for that book lung functionality. Another reason why we put water dishes into a tarantula enclosure is to help with the molting process. Now, I don't know if you've seen it before. When tarantulas get stuck in their molts, the reason this is because they haven't had enough hydration. Now, I don't know, again, if you know, when a tarantula molts, imagine my hand here is a tarantula. When a tarantula's in pre-molt, what the tarantula does is all the water, all the fluids that it's consumed through food or from sucking through the ground or puddles or whatever, it secretes around its body. Now, imagine this hand here is like a glove, right? So this is the tarantula laying there. Now, in between here, it pumps fluid, and that moistens the old exoskeleton with the new one sitting inside, which is why when a tarantula is getting ready to molt, sometimes you see little water droplets between the knuckles and the joints inside a tarantula. That's what it's doing. It's pumping fluid around, not only to moisten up the old exoskeleton so it can pull itself freely, it's also acting as a lubrication. So when it flips over on its back and the carapace pops open, that fluid allows the new exoskeleton to slide out freely. Now if your tarantula hasn't had enough hydration between the last time it molted and the new one, it doesn't have enough fluid to pump between the old and new exoskeletons, and what ends up happening is during the molt, the dry bits stay stuck in place and they can't pull it out because it's like glued. It hasn't got that lubrication, it hasn't got that fluid between it to pull out, and that will cause the tarantulas molting issues. That is another reason why just leaving it down to food alone is not good enough. Yes, they do get a lot of hydration from the food that they eat, but you know, who doesn't want to give their prized possession, their pet tarantula, every avenue to drink? It ties my head in knots when people turn around and say they don't have them in the wild, so I'm not going to give them, or they just missed it, they missed the enclosure. Misting is a terrible way to water your tarantulas. If you've got plants in there that, you know, you missed it and it lands on the leaves and it creates like a little water dish, or it creates a puddle on the bottom of the substrate, great. But what I've found in my experience is if you just miss the enclosure, if the tarantula's in its hide, in its burrow, the fine water droplets that land on the enclosure, they all disintegrate and they all evaporate. That's the word I'm looking for. Sorry, I was having a brain fart there. They evaporate before the tarantula can get any water. Now imagine your tarantula has only had, say, 80% of the water it needs to stay alive, to get through a molt, and then also hydrate itself once it's molted. Say it's only had 80% of that. If you're continuously misting and that tarantula is in its hide and it's covered it up and it's getting ready to molt, it's never going to get the remaining hydration that it needs. At least with a water dish, the tarantula will know, it will come out, it will search for water, and there'll be a nice full dish for it to drink from. That's what you have it there for. You have it for insurance purposes, and also, you know, peace of mind. If you start putting water dishes in your tarantula enclosures, I can guarantee you, if you've had a lot of molting issues in the past and you've had tarantulas just die, and you can't explain why, I guarantee you, if you put a water dish in the enclosure and keep it full and keep it clean at all times, the issues that you had previously should start to disappear. If they do continue, it's just purely down to the tarantula made the mistake of, oh, it didn't search for water, or it didn't feel it needed water. It's out of your hands. But if you give it every opportunity to drink clean, fresh water, you will have a healthier, happier spider than if you just rely on food alone. Now, I have seen it on other YouTube channels. There are some bigger channels that, you know, they don't bother with water dishes, but you know, for me, I think that's absolutely terrible. And also, if you really look closely, these channels have a lot of deaths, or they have a lot of spiders stuck in molts, or they have, you know, yeah, just lots of death curls, lots of health issues, and it's all 99% of what I've seen on YouTube. Those deaths were caused because of lack of hydration. It is the most important thing for a tarantula. Even like a human being, if you think the human body can go, I think it's 3 weeks or 4 weeks without eating. It can only go 1 week without drinking. Tarantulas are the same, just longer periods. They can go months, even up to a year, without eating, without touching a single shred of food. But they need the hydration, they need the water. It is the main ingredient they need in order to survive. It's even more important than the food. So make sure you put water dishes in there. Oh, it's drove me nuts this week seeing so many keepers, no water dish, no water dish, no water dish. And I know people are going to turn around now and say, but what about slings? You keep them in the vials. You can't give them a water dish, they're too small. Well, that is why you have to give slings moist substrate. What that does is, where all slings will burrow into moist substrate, what they do is they suck the moisture through the soil, and that's how they stay hydrated. They don't need the water dish. The reason why we give bigger tarantulas a water dish is because they need a substantial amount more of water, and they will happily walk up and go to a water dish and drink until they don't need any more. They will. It's like topping up diesel or petrol in your car. They drink as much as they need. Even if they never touch it again, they've consumed the amount that they need in order for healthy survival to get them through the next molt. Have you ever noticed that once a tarantula has molted, its abdomen is considerably smaller than before it molted? That's because if you imagine an abdomen as a petrol tank or a gas tank, if you're in America, that's filled with food and it's filled with fluid, and it stayed big and it stayed healthy all through the pre-molt period. It's been using a little amount because obviously tarantulas have a very slow metabolism. They don't need a lot of food in order to survive, but it's like a little petrol tank. They've used a little bit while they've been plodding along through pre-molt all the way up until a molt, and then half of that tank, when they've gone to molt, they've used in order to lubricate the new and old exoskeleton, which I was talking about. So they shrunk it by half, and then once they've molted, what's left in that tank is what they use until they harden up, until they can start again. Now, have you ever wondered why once a tarantula molts, some of the time they chew the molt up? It's because that old exoskeleton is like a tiny little water dish. All that fluid that it pumped around its body to free itself is still in that old molt. They drink it up. They're hydrating themselves again from the molt. So they're sucking all that moisture they can, because, you know, it's a hard process, molting. It's very stressful and it does require a lot of energy from the tarantula. So that's why they chew it up. And then that's why you give them, if you've got a fresh water dish in there, they'll go over and they'll drink from the water dish. It's that simple. If you've ever had a tarantula that after a molt it looks fine for a couple of days and you think, thank God it's got through its molt, it's going to be okay, and then you found it in death curl and you have no idea why, it's because after that molt it didn't have enough hydration to get through to when it's hardened and continue on with its life. Again, another reason why we give water dishes. That's it. That is the secret to good tarantula keeping. If anyone disagrees with me, then, you know, that's up to you. That's down to you. If you've had success not having a water dish in all your tarantula enclosures, you have been very, very lucky. It's not good husbandry, it's pure luck, in my opinion. Like, for me, there's no excuse for it. Water dishes, they can come in different shapes and sizes. You can use anything, whether you're using milk bottle caps or, you know, fizzy drink caps, or, you know, like little deli cups, or even purpose-made ones like you can buy in reptile shops and different places like that. It doesn't matter, as long as it's something that can hold a body of water that you can keep topping up and keep in the enclosure. That's better than nothing. So people out there, make sure to keep your water dishes topped up, and if you're not using them, please, I beg you to start sticking them into the enclosure. You will have much happier spiders because of it. The next topic that caught my eye, I was going through tarantula forums and seeing beginner questions in the hobby. There was, and then that got me thinking. People will ask the same questions over and over again, and we keep churning out the same answers. So the next segment, I'm going to do a thing on 5 things I wish I knew when I started out in the tarantula hobby. Now, I sat there last night and I thought about when I first started, after all the research and reading and learning I've done, what are the 5 main things that I wish I had known when I started? The first one was, I wish I had known not to panic when it comes to my tarantula. Now, what I mean by this is, if you go into either Facebook groups or forums, people sit there and go, oh my god, my tarantula has dug a burrow, I can't see it, I haven't seen it in a week, do I dig it up, what do I do? That's panicking. That is panicking. Do not ever panic when it comes to keeping your tarantula. The best bit of advice I can give a new tarantula keeper is, always remember, a tarantula knows what it needs far better than you ever will. If a tarantula's burrowed away, there's a reason for it. It's either in pre-molt, it wants to be left alone, it wants to be away from any potential predators, it wants to dig down to moist substrate so it can have a drink, like we just discussed in the water dish segment. There are 101 reasons why that tarantula has burrowed. So don't panic. Don't panic. Why? Another question. My tarantula stopped eating. It's been 3 or 4 weeks. What do I do? How do I get it to eat? Tarantulas go a long time without eating. Don't panic. There's all sorts of things, strange things that people panic about, that, you know, you just need to stay calm at all times. All times. It doesn't matter what is going on. The worst thing you can do in any situation, even if your tarantula is like having a bad molt, if it's lost a leg, if you panic, you're more than likely, or even doing like a rehouse, there's a good example. If you panic during a rehouse, it's more than likely going to do more harm than good. The best thing to always do is stop, relax, evaluate the situation, and then act. Most of the time with tarantulas, you don't have to act at all with anything. You know, like I said, feeding. Tarantulas only stop eating for 2 reasons. Or 3 reasons. A, they're not hungry. B, they've eaten enough. Or C, they're in pre-molt. Or D, fourth, They've just molted and they're waiting to harden up. So 4 reasons why a tarantula will not eat. There's no other reason than that. Don't panic. It's not eating because, it's suddenly decided I want to go on a diet and, or I'm going to starve myself to death because I'm a silly animal. It's just not the case. It's never the case. So don't panic. That's the first thing I wish I had learned when becoming a new tarantula owner. I'm guilty of it. I used to panic myself. I have a Nanded chromatus. I've said it before. When I first got my Nanded chromatus, it was my second tarantula. My first one had never burrowed or anything or done anything like that. The Nanded chromatus burrowed. I didn't see it for like a week or 2. I panicked. I got scared that the hole would close in and the burrow would cave in and I'd never see the tarantula again. And I dug it up. And guess what? The tarantula was fine. It was absolutely fine. It wasn't for a while after reading and properly learning, because I made the mistake. My first tarantula, I went out and I bought it on a whim without really doing any research whatsoever. And it was the same with my second one. I never researched the species. I never knew anything about them really, other than saying, yeah, I want one and that's it. I made that mistake. I'm guilty of that. But after that, I learned about the behaviour and I just learned the best thing to do with tarantulas really, 99% of the time, is just leave them alone. If you're not topping up the water dish or putting a food item in there, there's no need for you to be in the enclosure. So like I said, the first thing, do not panic when it comes to your tarantula. The second thing I wish that I had known when I started out in this hobby was how long they live for. Having a tarantula is a lifelong commitment. If you get like something like a Brachypelma hamori or a Gramostoma rosea as a beginner tarantula, you've got to be prepared that you are going to have this spider in your collection for 30 plus years. It's not going to be, oh, I'm going to have it for 2 or 3 years and then it's going to die and then I don't have to worry about it again. This is a lifelong commitment. And the more tarantulas you get in your collection, the more that responsibility and the more time you have to invest into these animals. Now I know they're very easy to look after. I know you can feed them once a week, you can feed them once a month, you can pretty much leave them. You can leave them to their own devices, and they're low maintenance. But with that low maintenance, they are high commitment. You need to be prepared, like a cat or a dog. You may not be able to go away for a month, especially if you're into breeding and you have to look after egg sacs, or you start selling and you get a name for selling. Like a lot of people are doing that now. It's great to see people breeding captive bred slings. And there's so many variables in it that you have to be prepared to take care of the animals, is what I'm trying to say. I'm not saying you can't go on holiday for 2 weeks, of course you can, but you have to be prepared that you can't just up and move if you've got a large collection and place you move to. You have to be able to take a large collection. You have to be prepared to be in it for the long haul. That's what I'm trying to say. It is very time consuming, but very rewarding in the long term. The third thing I wish I had known when I first got into the hobby was always accept the possibility you could be wrong about something. Now, I know a lot of people say research, do your research, learn everything you can. And that's a good starting point. The only problem with research is in 2022, there are so many different conflicting ideas on what is the correct way to keep a tarantula, it doesn't matter how much research you do, you're never gonna get a definitive answer. So always be prepared that if you learn something new and it contradicts something you already thought you knew, be prepared to accept that. I see so many arguments go on in the tarantula community that all boil down to the fact that someone refuses to accept a new idea, and they may be clinging on to outdated information, incorrect information, or just something they've discovered through watching their own collection, that they think is accurate. And the argument comes from, not being able to give up that idea. It's very detrimental not only to the hobby, but for your own personal growth. You need to be prepared to, accept new ideas. It's like the other day, I'll give you an example. I saw a post that someone had put up, and this guy absolutely got ripped to shreds. He had a Brachypelma homori, adult female, but he had it set up in an arboreal enclosure. It was a 20 by 20 by 30 acrylic enclosure. It didn't have much substrate in it, and the tarantula was climbing all over the place. Now, people ripped into him because they said that, you're keeping it incorrectly. It should be, 30 by 30 by 30 enclosure, deep substrate to burrow, your normal terrestrial setup, hide, etc, etc. Now, this guy got on the defensive, and he was like, nothing, in the wild, these things are, pictured up trees, like hunting up in trees, they're off the ground. And then Andrew Smith wrote a very great comment on there, and he said, you know what, I've seen Brachypelma in the wild. They live on nice steep embankments, in between rocks, they're climbing all over the place, they have nice deep burrows in the ground under rocks, and etc, etc. And this guy turned around and went, yeah, see, these guys climb and he tried to use that to justify his enclosure. And I couldn't help myself but say, yeah, but mate, even though Andrew has just turned around and said that they live this way in the wild, blah 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 blah, your enclosure is still nothing like Andrew's described. At the end of the day, as nice as your enclosure is, it's not right for the species. It had a huge booty on it, it was climbing to the top, it had literally an inch or so of substrate. I said to him, that's not a steep embankment, mate. That's not, like rocks and stuff to climb on. That's a fall from height. Any fall from height onto that little tiny amount of substrate, you're going to have a dead tarantula. And he was like, no, you're wrong. I'm going to keep it like this. I've had X amount of years experience keeping these animals this way. And that's the point I'm trying to make. It doesn't matter. You need to be able to accept that you may be wrong, that you may need to change your ideas, and that someone else may know more than you. So be prepared to adapt. That's the next thing I wish I knew. You can never know it all. That's it. You can never know it all in this hobby. Now, the next thing I wish I had known when I started out in this hobby was how cheap and how expensive it is all dependent on you. and you shouldn't be influenced to change how you do things because you're jealous of something else. And what I mean by that is, if you've got a spider and you're keeping it in like a Tupperware container or something like that, made out of plastic, some air holes in it, because you can afford that, that's perfectly fine. If you can afford to go out and get a nice acrylic enclosure and do it up and have it look nice, that's fine. If you can afford to have a glass enclosure and do it up and have it nice, they're all just as fine as each other. The person with a plastic one shouldn't feel that they have to live up to the glass enclosure or the acrylic enclosure. As long as the spider's happy, it's perfectly fine. You shouldn't let people bully you and say, oh, you don't care for your spider as much as I do because look what you've got it in. And that's what I wish I knew. I felt pressure when I first started. I used to look at my collection in little like Tupperware containers and think, you know what? I need big glass enclosures. I need big expensive enclosures. I need to look like, you know, like I'm an expert and I really care. And you shouldn't feel that pressure. And you shouldn't have to change what you're doing to make others feel happy, and you shouldn't change what you're doing to feel better about yourself. As long as your tarantula is thriving and is healthy and has everything it needs inside whatever you keep it in, that's good enough. Like that tore me to bits for a long time. I was like, am I doing enough? Am I not doing enough? The spider's alive, it's happy, you're doing enough. So that's all the things that I wish I had known or had an idea of when I first got into the hobby. But I've been waffling on now for 30 minutes. I am going to end the podcast here. Don't forget, guys, I do rely on your questions during the week in order to make these podcasts. So once you've listened to this, please write down in the comments anything you want me to cover next week. It would really be helpful. And I also really love the interaction I get to have with you guys. That's what this podcast is all about, and that's why I set it up. I just love the two-way street that we have, you as subscribers and viewers, and just me as the host. That is what makes this whole thing go round. The next thing I want to do is just remind you guys, we are getting closer to the 2,000 subscriber giveaway, which is absolutely awesome. So if you're not already and you want to be in with a chance to win the 2K subscriber giveaway, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Go over and watch my Grammar Stone of Rosea video and just type T Celedonia in the comments and you will be entered. And for those of you thinking, what's the prize? The prize, well, there's two prizes. And it's just one prize. There's going to be one winner. It's going to be a T Celedonia and also a Ferrophosa Apophysis. Both of those will go out to one lucky winner as soon as we hit that 2K mark. So hopefully, if you're not subscribed, you're off doing that now. Thank you. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up. I'm going to end it here. I'm glad you sat here to the end and listened to me waffle on for a long time. I really appreciate it. Take care, have a great week, have a great rest of the day. I'll see you in the next one.